Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, Brian Charlson, is someone I've had the privilege of knowing for many years. And I learned a few more things about him at dinner last night, most of which I won't share. I will share this, that in 1984 he began his career, the part of his career which involved teaching people to use computers via Braille, large print, and speech. And after 14 years of doing that teaching and becoming such a veteran teacher, he was appointed director of the Carroll Center for the Blind's computer training services. In that position, where it's been since 1999, Brian has presented at every major assistive technology-related conference in the country, from California State University at Northridge to the Assistive Technology Industry Association, Closing the Gap, which is an educational conference that's held every year out in Minneapolis. He's also at least a 25-year member of the American Council of the Blind, which is a wonderful advocacy organization where Brian's held leadership positions on the state and national levels. He's presented on special education, leadership, and assistive tech in Israel, Canada, Spain, Greece, and Australia, among others. And a couple of his current passions. One has to do with getting access training to everybody who needs it through online learning. Another one has to do with being a serious Major League Baseball fan. I hesitate to say this of the, who are those guys? The Boston... It's okay, we like them anyway. And his last one is a passion for internet radio, where he is the co-host of the Yin and Yang show on AC Radio Interactive. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honestly privileged and honored to present to you Brian Charlson.
The two pieces of technology I struggle with the most are microphones and exercise equipment. Today I want to speak to you about something that I think every blind and visually impaired person struggles with, and that's employment. And because of my area of expertise, it's going to be mostly about employment and how it's impacted positively or negatively by technology. Although you just heard kind of my professional bio, I'm going to draw you farther back in time, in my way back machine. Back to the summer of 1967. Free love. At that point, I was 11 years old, and while my mother was off bowling with her best friend, and my father was mowing my grandmother's lawn, happened to be next door, I snuck into my mother's kitchen, crawled up onto the countertop, I was a little kid, and pulled down baking soda and apple cider vinegar. Oh. And I proceeded to make myself a little homemade cocktail. And ran to the back door with this bottle, opened the door and went to throw it, and instead of throwing it into the blackberry bushes where it would have exploded and shredded up the blackberry bushes, it went off in my hand and blinded me. So I got kind of a rude awakening, so to speak, into the world of blind people. I came to in the hospital 3 days later, and I had my first introduction to blindness-related technology. My first talking book machine was already on the table side next to my hospital bed, because my mother's best friend, who was beating her once again at bowling, happened to be totally blind. So I already had this idea that blind people had to be really with it people, because you had to be with it to beat my mom every week. She worked outside the home. She raised 3 children on her own, and she told the best dirty jokes you ever heard. Very easy to impress an 11-year-old boy. So my first technology was a talking book machine. And to this day, the machines that allow me to read are hugely important to me. This suspicious bulge in my jacket pocket here is my Victor Reader Springer. I read, maybe 120 books a year on average. Compare that to your average sighted person, please. They're not even close. So technology played an important part of my life from the beginning. In my education, learning to type, learning to use tape recording devices. And it wasn't until I got into college and a little bit beyond that, got a degree in political science, that I got a job at the Oregon State Senate, being an assistant sergeant at arms. And the Commission for the Blind issued me my first piece of truly adaptive tech, a thing called a vertebrae. Anybody go back that far?
Yeah.
Good old vertebrae. And I had a 300 baud acoustic coupler modem that I would plug into a telephone booth in the back of the Senate chambers and balance my vertebrae on my lap in order to look up things on the mainframe to schedule which staff were going to be staffing which committee meetings over the course of the week. Adaptive technology, very important. But one of the bizarre things about this adaptive technology is that refreshable braille display that I used back in the day is the same refreshable braille display that you use today. The dots are still raised and lowered in the same way. There is virtually no other technology that you deal with that is as undeveloped as refreshable braille. And that's criminal. That's absolutely criminal. Now, when I talk about access technology and employment, I would have to tell you my other credentials. Yes, I do all this tech stuff. Yes, I'm a public speaker and an advocate and all those kind of fun things. But I've also been employed most of my adult life. My first job outside of, I'm the best laundress you ever met. That was my job when I was growing up. Every one of the 5 kids had to have something to earn their allowance. And while my brothers were mowing the lawn, I was folding the clothes. And to this day, I drive my wife crazy. Everything has to be folded right. But then I got my first job that my teacher of the visually impaired arranged for me for one summer, where I made fishing lures for the Grizzly Lure. Then I made a little bit of money working for a company that made kidney dialysis machines, Drake, Willick, and Smith. Believe it or not, I was in charge of making blood detectors. Boy, that sounds so good. But I also, quite honestly, learned one thing the most from my parents, and that's a work ethic that suggests that there was not a single job that should be considered to be beneath me. That it was a shame, that is a shame on me, to be able to work and not get out there and do my best to get work. So I have had 2 jobs I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But that nonetheless reaffirmed my interest in being as self-reliant financially as I possibly could be. I worked in a cannery. Anybody here ever worked in a cannery? Well, let me tell you, back in Oregon, a lot of people work in canneries. And I worked in a cannery on making green beans for canning. Now, my job was not one of the finest ones. I worked on a conveyor belt that jiggled the beans so that large objects rose to the top and small objects dropped to the bottom so that we could catch all of the twigs and things that the automatic harvesters did. Now, I had to do this barehanded while my coworkers were using working gloves because I couldn't tell the difference between a green bean and a stick through those leaves, through those heavy gloves. The belt, though, was affectionately called the rat belt because they harvest a lot more than green beans. That lasted for a short period of time. I graduated to sauerkraut production. Imagine taking cabbages and throwing them at something that looks like an open-bladed fan, letting it shred and fall into a vat the size of a swimming pool, spraying it with pickling compound, and on a regular basis, wearing waiter boots up to your hips, jump in with a pitchfork, and do a bit of tossed salad. And you haven't lived till you've been quick crowded. Like quicksand, but in sauerkraut. You don't have time to ever eat a Reuben sandwich again. I'm telling you these stories because they tell you about the value of work ethic. Something that if you approach that only when you are an adult is a very hard thing to adopt. There are a number of different barriers to blind people finding employment, and I'm a little ashamed to say that some of them are in ourselves. The unwillingness to relocate, when virtually every sighted person you know has relocated for work. The assuming that the morning commute should happen in 15 minutes will be another example. So we talk about partnership, but that partnership is really three ways. It is the public-private partnership that no doubt you'll hear over and over again during the course of today. But it's also the public, the private, and the consumer partnership that really makes the difference between success and failure in terms of employment. For technology, there's a number of things that each member of that three-way partnership can involve themselves with. From the consumer side, since that's what I was when I woke up this morning, and that's what I'll be when I fall asleep tonight. From the consumer side, you heard the words earlier, lifelong learning. When it comes to technology, anybody who hasn't learned something this week has already fallen behind. It changes while you're taking a phone call. Constant change. And you have to build into your life as a user of access technology, a commitment to continuously upgrade your knowledge in the use of these technologies. Not only your knowledge in their use, but what are they for that matter? What are the options out there? As you've heard, I've been an advocate in the field of blindness for many, many years. And one of the things we advocated for strongly as we recreated the Rehabilitation Act was a term called consumer choice. Now, consumer choice is somewhat like democracy. It's only choice if it's informed choice. It's not choice when you hear there are two choices and you choose B when the state agency wants to provide you A. It's your responsibility as a consumer that's been granted choice to educate yourself so you can be part of that selection process. Not just because your friend Charlie uses it, but because you've truly educated yourself and are going to work together with your employer, potential or actual, and your state agency who's providing rehabilitation services for you, to make sure that the decisions made are ones that you agree with, and you agree with through informed choice. Technology. How many of you who are consumers in the room, first off, let me get a feel for how many of the audience are. Just put your hands together for me. One of these days, I'm going to get the whole world to rewrite the word consumer out, because it sounds like we never produce anything. We just consume. And I'm telling you, I produce. Thank you very much. So, nonetheless, we users of access technology, how many of you are using speech as your primary means of access? How many screen magnification? How many braille? Now, biggest difference between those three. Of course, there's many more low vision people on this planet than there are functionally blind people on this planet. I recently sat on the committee in Massachusetts that selects the Blind Employee of the Year awards. And we start that process out first by inducting people into what's called the Carroll Society, named after Father Thomas Carroll, the founder of the agency that I work for. And of the people who were nominated this year, 4 out of 5 were high-functioning, visually impaired, legally blind individuals, 3 of which use no adaptive technology whatsoever. Now, I have nothing against that, although I wonder whether or not I want to give an award to somebody who didn't have to do anything out of the ordinary to do their job, although some of them have quite anything but ordinary jobs. Nonetheless, low vision is a hugely important part of what we do in the blindness, low vision, visually handicapped, whatever term you want to use, market. My best friend and co-producer of the Yin Yang show, mentioned earlier, Rick, worked for 30 years for the company that I used to just think of as the Ross Perot company, EDS, eventually bought by HP. And during those years, he crunched numbers. When you were asked about, outsourcing overseas jobs in the U.S., that's what he did for a living. And he worked at that for many, many years, well educated, but during the past 5 years, his vision diminished dramatically. And he didn't call uncle in doing it as a low vision person until he was looking at Excel spreadsheets at times 12 magnification. Those of you who are low vision people know exactly why that kind of scares me. There are times, ladies and gentlemen, when the technology you should be using is not low vision technology, but speech technology. Use those abilities that you have, those skills you have, use those things on the side of your head called ears to do more than hold up low vision glasses. Okay? I can get away with saying that because I'm leaving town tonight. Okay? But again, it's important to learn to use your low vision skills. Absolutely. But it's also important to know when it's not the best means to achieve what you're trying to achieve. You are capable of both hearing and seeing as low vision people, and you should use that combination effectively. Those of you who are using speech as your primary means of access, how many of you are using more than one screen reader? It used to be one of those things where I didn't believe in more than one screen reader. After all, it's hard to be a master of all trades. But the fact of the matter is that the more complicated your job is, the more likely it is that one screen reader is going to do a part of that job better than another screen reader. We also have some value in this whole concept of competition. In a world where there's only one product, there's not much drive to improve it. In a world where there's only one product, there's not much drive to bring the price down to where the people can afford it. So we want to keep more than one screen reader going. We want to keep more than one screen magnifier going. We want to keep more than one refreshable braille display going out there, not just to give you choice, but to force innovation through the process. Screen reader users, if you only know one, now's the time to grab NVDA, if it's not the only one you have, so that you have two of them in your pocket. NVDA, open source, screen reader for Windows products, costs you $0 and 0 cents. So the dollars and cents isn't the issue. It also teaches you to be a little more flexible in terms of what technologies you need to use for work. You don't have to go out and find a job that only can be done with JAWS because you only know JAWS. It gives you more flexibility in the workplace. Braille users. Using refreshable Braille as one of your means of accessing the computer that you use, correct?
Yes.
Does it astound you what I said at the beginning, that the Braille display I used back in 1978 is the same Braille dot you're using today? It's still a piezoelectric. We need to talk to the companies that we do business with and say this is inappropriate for so little research to be done in creating refreshable Braille. You're restricted as a Braille user to a single line. And if you're going to be a fast Braille reader, we're taught to use 2 lines at a minimum. Finish up line 1 as you're lining up to line 2 and so forth. Yet there's no multi-line Braille display out there that any of us have seen outside the lab. You need to be asking for that. Not just asking, demanding that that research be done on your behalf. There are some interesting investigations out there right now, but strangely enough, they're not happening in the United States of America. They're happening in Europe. Royal National Institute for the Blind is looking at using that same little device that's in your cell phone that causes the camera to work properly, something called a wiggle motor, to drive that Braille dock. And if they're successful, we'll see Braille drop to 10 cents on the dollar. It's pretty exciting to me, because once it drops down to that, multi-line is going to be possible, and perhaps even raised line graphics in a virtual kind of situation. When it comes to access technology, there is a responsibility by the agency to make sure that everybody who's advising individuals know how it can be used, where it can be used, and in our universe where we're adapting to what's happening out there in the real world of work, we need to have the skills to configure it effectively for a wide variety of work environments. So I charge the state agency here and anybody else you talk to out there that it is your responsibility as an agency to make sure those resources exist. Unfortunately, in the state of Massachusetts, there's one JAWS scripter, one. And you can bet that impacts employment. Two, we need the employers to remember when we sit down across the table or desk from them looking to apply for a job and they look at our resumes and they see that in fact on paper we're qualified, to suspend disbelief. We know that part of what goes through the interviewer's heart is, if I were blind, I can't imagine how I could do this. It's an unfair comparison. We are qualified. We are trained. We've been living the life. It's nothing new to us. I ask employers again to remember that we come to them as qualified employees, not as newly blinded yesterday or this past minute. Don't compare us to what they think they might be able to do. And lastly, I ask consumers/producers to take on this concept of lifelong learning and the responsibility to assure that you are qualified for that job. You are qualified for that promotion by doing more than the bare minimum, by avoiding blaming the tech for all of your problems, when maybe you simply don't know how to make it do a particular thing and need to do a little bit of training or retraining in the process. Be proud of what you can do, but also remember you need to earn that pride. It's not something you get because everybody should be kind to you. It's something you should get because you earned your place to learn. Boy, do I sound like a preacher this morning. As you can tell, when I started my presentation this morning, I'm a much more happy-go-lucky guy than that. I'm looking forward to the next 10 years, because I know that in the next 10 years, when I get up through the use of a talking alarm clock, adjust the temperature by a talking thermostat, step on the scale and have it announced to the entire household how much I've gained. When I go out to the kitchen and all of my appliances are accessible because I had that option. When I sit down in the living room and listen to this morning's newspapers independently. When I crack open that next novel. When I get to work, maybe behind the wheel of a Google smart car. When I get to work and the people I supervise continuously forget that I happen to be a blind person because I'm good at what I do. When, I'm going to tell you one last story about employment and then I'm going to shut up. That is, I have a good friend. He is a principal of a school, grade school in Boston. And he came to me for computer training, and we did some of the training for him, and then they dispatched some rehab teachers from the state agency to help him get some continuing training in that. And of course I'm blind, and the trainer of the commission center was blind. And the first day the trainer showed up at his school and was standing there with his white cane, waiting for his time to go into the principal's office, a student came by and said, "Hi, what school are you principal of?" There was an assumption by this kid that since his principal was blind, a lot of principals must be blind. What a wonderful accident to happen when the children can imagine that you and I must be employed because their daddies are employed or their moms are employed. Take the challenge, make it lifelong, and I'm sure we'll all succeed at breaking the barrier. When I was first blinded, I was told that the unemployment rate was 70%. The last stats I read said the numbers haven't improved. It's our responsibility to improve. Thank you very much.
To ask whether our second panel has arrived.
Yes. Aaron here.
Yes. They're here. Okay, I am sorry that we don't have time for questions.
No. We have a short 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. David, you'll hold on. Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions. Probably that means 2 or 3 tops, folks. So, David is free to help recognize people, and so if you have questions for Brian, this is your moment.
So
We do have roving mics.
if you will just rise, there is a hand here, the woman standing over in the end. Somebody can get a mic over there, please. If you could just tell us your name and then ask a question.
My name is Chancey Fleet. I'm an adaptive technology specialist at the Jewish Guild, and I really love NVDA a lot. I'm really happy that you mentioned it, but it's challenging for me as a professional in the field and for my department because if you recommend NVDA for someone, there's no guarantee of future support. We don't know what's going to happen a couple of years down the line, and this is something that we've heard. And we want to support it and embrace it, but in a world of uncertainty, what do you say to someone that says, that's not an effective use of training time because there's no guarantee that it's going to go forward?
I'm going to have to go back a few years to give you the answer. The answer was when I was first training people to use adaptive technology at the Carroll Center back in 1984. During part of my day, I trained people on CPN. You didn't hear it. I've spent part of my time teaching people DOS. You didn't hear it. I spent part of my time teaching people to use the Apple II. It isn't here anymore. There's always a danger when you're using technology that it won't be here anymore. I taught people to use the early Mac, and that company that provided the access technology went out of business. It was for profit, but it still went out of business, and we lost 3 different types of access technology and didn't regain them until very recently with the latest versions of the Apple iOS. I would say to those who are saying no to NVDA, say, how can we assure that NVDA stays alive? 2 gentlemen are the primary developers of that product. Although it is shareware, frequently people treat it as freeware and don't follow up with a donation to support that development. Perhaps it's time for our agency to take a look at consumer choice and offer up a little bit of cash to keep the hope alive.
There's a question just behind our first questioner.
Hi, Ryan. My name is Lucia, and I have to say I'll try and keep it as quick as I can. I love one of the points you made about the person that sits behind the desk across from the employer, and the employer is imagining himself as newly blinded. How would they do this job if they were blind? I have a question. How do we get employers past that? Because even good grooming, good mobility, good personality, good this, good that, is not working, not with 84% of working age visually impaired people out of work. How do we convince these people? Thank you very much.
There are a lot of things going on around the country dealing with a very, very important word, and that's internship. You know, if you pick up a resume and the resume shows all about the person's education and nothing about their work experience, and the next resume you pick up has somebody with both, which one would you hire? You can prove you're capable on your resume if you can put down on that resume some information about your work experience. And if they're not going to hire you doing it, isn't it worth the investment to volunteer doing it? So that that resume doesn't show a total lack of experience? Those of you who've lost your vision after work experience, you're stuck with the same situation. That is, well, yeah, you did this, but you did it before you lost your vision. How can you demonstrate to me, the employer, that you know how to do this now that you are a blind or visually impaired person? So I hope that, again, those partnerships we've been talking about will offer opportunities to get work experience to go along with the training credentials that you've worked so hard to get. It may take time, but I think the longest I was ever unemployed was 2 years, and you could have eaten off of my floors because I had nothing better to do than to mop the floor. And I hated that feeling. It is not a good feeling. But I did invest and teach myself to use computers, and then volunteered to teach others how to use them. And you can bet that that was on my resume when I applied to the Carroll Center 26 and a half years ago.